Hollywood culture. And our pair of guests will discuss that and many other topics. Please, let's give a warm welcome today to Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel.
Thanks very much. It's certainly an honor to be here at the National Press Club and to make new friends and see old friends, including Roger Simon, who I intuitively know was applauding at the mention of the Daily Illini. We would also like to thank Senator Dole for doing such a great job on the advance work for this talk. And with a bow in his direction and with the acknowledgement that this issue, which he has raised and which has been raised by many other people as well, that this is kind of a topic of the moment, I think that instead of going directly into some of the stuff we have prepared involving what's good and bad at the movies, although we plan to get to that, it might be wise to just start right off by taking the bull by the horns and talking about this attack on Hollywood and what it's doing or not doing to American values. Do you have any thoughts on that, my partner? I have a feeling that you might.
I'm certainly glad you used the word bull to start off with. You know, I wanted to cut through the obvious knocks on Senator Dole, the obvious ones being that he hasn't, get this, hasn't seen the movies that he was criticizing. Do you realize how much work we could get done? How many shows we could tape in a single day using that approach?
We could do an entire year's show in 1 week.
We could do the movies of the 21st century right now.
It would be fabulous, yes. Have you seen the movie? Don't need to see it. I'm a senator.
He'd
of course,
also
it would
said,
probably help if we had somebody to write the show for us. That would be nice.
Oh, yeah. He was obviously reading someone else's words. I hope they had seen the movies, but you never know.
In any event, I'm glad to see that you are not going to make a point of this.
Yeah. I thought, though, to go beyond it is to ask the tough questions that someone would say, like this one. Okay, Dole may be a know-nothing because he doesn't know of the films that he's talking about. But other people that you guys might respect, Senator Simon from Illinois, Senator Bradley, they have questioned.
President Clinton?
Exactly, a big
Vice
movie
President
fan,
Gore?
a
Yes.
very big movie fan. In fact, tonight I think he's seeing Apollo 13 preview. Lucky guy, he gets to see it before we do. Anyway, what about the issue? Let's get beyond Dole. Let's take the movies more seriously, as we have done every week for more than 1,300 weeks. 1,300 weeks of our dumping on Hollywood, seriously. We probably have dumped on Hollywood and the bad films and the bad values of those films, artistic and otherwise, more than any other people in the country for the last 20 years. So when we knock him, don't think we like the bad stuff. We dislike it more, and we've actually cared enough to see it. But let's get back to, the issue. In other words, is there a serious component in any of this?
Well, I think there is. Of course, everybody is now rushing to get ahead of Dole on this issue. I was watching Larry King on Monday night, and the president and vice president both said, oh, well, we said that months ago, years ago. Tipper Gore was saying this about rap lyrics 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so that everybody now is on record that they're all opposed to movies and music which advocate violence against women, shooting cops, perpetrating a violent view of American society. I think the problem with just saying that is you're making an error that no journalism student in college or in high school will be allowed to get away with, and that is you're confusing the inventory with the analysis. To say that a movie or a song contains something is not to make a meaningful statement about it, except simply to say that that is a factual element, that is what it contains. I think you have to look a little further into tone, mood, message, purpose, context, and origin in order to understand whether a movie or a song has a message that's worthwhile or whether it's simply negative and destructive. And that's something I think that Senator Dole and other people who have joined his cause have not been willing to do. It would seem to be very simple and obvious to say that, and this is what I call Ebert's Law, although I do not believe it's original with me, a movie is not about what it's about how it's about it. It doesn't make a movie bad because a cop gets killed in it. Maybe it makes the movie good because it shows how the cop got killed, or why the cop got killed, or maybe why cops shouldn't be killed, or maybe why this cop was a bad cop. There are all kinds of dramatic elements that get involved here. And if you simply enumerate things on a list that you found in a song or in a movie, you haven't said anything about it at all. And that's the problem. People are trying to take these movies totally out of context, and then other people who haven't seen the movies or heard the songs either go along and nod and say, oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's about cop killing, or oh, it's nothing but wall-to-wall violence. The obvious mistake that Dole made was to confuse Natural-Born Killers, which happens to be a movie which attacks the glorification of violence in the media. He confused that with a movie that only exploits violence, while at the same time praising a film like True Lies, which in fact does exploit violence, so that it shows truly that he hadn't seen or thought about either film. Now, I happen to like True Lies, I think
didn't.
more than Gene. I enjoyed it. I thought it was kind of comic book violence, and I did enjoy it. But
And it's funny, I
apart
thought
from
that,
that,
yeah, I thought that and I went after the sexual scenes in the picture. Again, it's very important. Because this debate is the kind of political debate that it's just what he wants, to divide people. This is not the kind of debate the way he's framed it by not seeing the stuff and the supporters. This doesn't bring anybody together. This is the old boogeyman out there. And where does the boogeyman theory come from? It comes out of our frustration, an honest frustration. We've got lots of problems in the country. We can't seem to control the drug problem. Mr. Bennett, who's criticizing movies, tried. We can't seem to control the quality of education. Mr. Bennett, who's criticized the movies, has tried. We feel these things, and we're parents. I have 3 children, young children. I care about this deeply. Care about it enough to take my kids to the movies and take them to the ones that I think are good, and to talk about them and reinforce in conversation with them when they see a bad one by happenstance, if I haven't seen it as a preview. And I try and talk to them about why they thought it was bad, so they feel comfortable exercising their opinion. That's caring about movies more than saying they're awful out there in Hollywood. That's so easy, it's so cheap, it's so beneath us as we conclude this millennium. And you know how smart American parents are and American adults are? They agree with just what I said. Listen to this, USA Today, oddly enough, the headline, they're ripping us off, Raj, 2 thumbs down on Hollywood. And listen to this, USA Today. Who's to blame for exposing children under the age of 12 and children ages 13 to 17 to sex and violence in movies and music on TV? Who's to blame? You know what the #1 item selected for who's to blame for exposing? 3-to-1 over the entertainment industry, 3 times more. Here's what the adults of America said, who aren't running for office. They said, parents. Of course it's parents, and that woman right there is nodding. And of course. And the word on this is their comments, the comments of these politicians is, of course. So what are you going to do about it? Today, Mike Flannery, who works for WBBM TV in Chicago and used to work for the Sun-Times in Chicago, cornered Senator Dole and asked him stuff. He said, I don't have a legislative agenda. I never said I was a film critic. Now, how can you say that? Of course he was trying to be a film critic. I mean, he says his 9-year-old son agrees with him. What, on Pulp Fiction? I mean, excuse me, on Natural-Born Killers? I mean, those kind of flip remarks don't add anything. Our show is dedicated to pointing out what is lacking in quality. I tried to do it with True Lies. I took it seriously. Roger takes the film seriously. And I resent, not the getting into the debate with a serious debate about film. I welcome the senators and the president who've seen the pictures, but somebody who doesn't even care enough about you, the subject matter, your intelligence, to just blanketly knock this stuff, it is insulting.
What he's trying to do basically is suck up to the far right, and we might as well notice that. The fact is that when Senator Dole attacks rap music, and let's get to that now, because that's an area that a lot of people who might defend movies are bothered by rap. He's using code words. When he goes on television and he talks about rap artists, what is he really saying to most of the people who are listening to him or are in his audience or are potential voters? When we hear the words rap music, what do a lot of people think of? Drug-crazed, young black men in the ghetto with guns shooting cops. That's what we think of. And that's, I think, what he wants us to think of. He's probably not interested in the fact that 95% of rap music doesn't have really anything to do with the kind of targets that he's singled out, such as cop killing and wife beating and woman beating. And I don't really like the stuff that does deal with that subject, those subjects, to tell you the truth. He's probably not interested in the fact that more than 50% of all the people who buy and listen to rap music are white teenagers, mostly in suburbia. If you go to the record stores and find out where their sales are, you'll find out that happens to be true. He probably would be amazed if he heard that. In fact, he would probably be amazed if he listened to a rap record, because I doubt if he ever has, and I'm certain he's never listened to a whole rap album. But if you do listen to the voice of rap with an open mind, what you're hearing is a message, a voice from the inner city. That's what good rap music does. These are people who are alive now, who are sharing our country, who are our fellow citizens, and this is how they feel. And it seems to me that somebody of truly presidential stature would want to open up a dialogue, would want to say, why do you feel that way? Why do you fear the police? Why don't you have more respect in this particular song, let's say, for family values, if that's the current buzzword? What causes you to analyze society in this language and with these images? That might be an interesting question for him to ask. He might start by asking a man named Ice Cube, who has been in a couple of movies that I'm sure the senator has never seen, Boys in the Hood, and I think he was in Menace to Society, but I could be wrong about that. Those are two movies that also come from the same segment of our society with important, powerful messages. Two of the best films that have come out, not silly films with Tim Allen playing a guy who becomes Santa Claus. We're not going to solve our problems. We probably could solve our problems if one of us could become Santa Claus, but I don't think it's going to happen. What he's doing basically is he's trying to draw a wedge. He's trying to say those terrible people over there are perverting our Central American values with their bad ideas about violence and about the family. Yet at the same time, when President Clinton comes forward and says, well, let's turn down the heat. What about hate talk on the radio? What about radio commentators who talk about using the president and the first lady for target practice? Isn't that bad too? You don't hear anything from Senator Dole about those people. You see, he only wants to single out the hate mongers who are involved in a demographic group that he knows he's not going to appeal to. And until he gets open-minded enough, it seems to me, to broaden his message to include everything in the same category, he's only really being partisan.
I think we probably have done enough on that subject,
Okay.
but maybe not. But we can get back to it with your questions. We were invited because, as was mentioned, this is the beginning of our 20th year reviewing films together, and so we were asked to look back over the 20 years and talk about what's right and wrong with American movies. And the first thing we were asked to do was select our favorite moment from our show. Now, this you're going to find hard to believe. Roger and I do not discuss what we're going to talk about before we do our show, unless it's a special show on one subject and we have to do some planning. It's all spontaneous. Independently, our producer asked us each to name our favorite moment from our shows of 20 years, almost 1,000 shows. And we came up with the same moment, which you're now going to see. The show was called Hail, Hail, Black and White. And this was at a time when colorization was all the rage, and we were upset by that. And so we decided to do a show praising, obviously, black and white, and you will see that we chose to do it in black and white. I know that there are people listening on the radio. In fact, some of my favorite cab drivers in Chicago are listening to NPR right now. All you guys, on the count of 3, honk your horns in Chicago. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. I just had the image of people turning all over Michigan and Wacker right now. What the heck's going on here? The White Sox won the pennant again? No. Thank you, guys. I appreciate every ride you give me. But we're going to try to describe a little bit in voiceover to the NPR radio folks what's going on TV. You'll be able to see Hail, Hail, Black and White. Let's take a short look.
Monitor of the two of our in black and white for the first time. We haven't seen ourselves this way. What did I do the first thing? I went like this.
Right.
I became...
Waldo Heidecker, yeah.
I tried to become more elegant. This forced me. There is inherent drama in it. There's no question about it. I behaved differently because I saw myself being photographed in black and white. It wasn't just the tuxedo. It was the whole ambience of the whole scene.
It makes you feel somehow as if there is an additional level of mystery,
no question,
or suggestion beyond the plain old color mugshot of you sitting there.
I want to rise up and look down at you because I know it's going to have almost laser-like power.
Really? And I want to pull a chair out from under you before you sit back down because I know that will have almost laser-like comedy.
You know, Rogers, I just saw that the great studio photographer George Sherrill did a photograph of us for Playboy magazine, and when I went up like that to, you know, looking down, that was the same angle, in effect, that Sherrill was using with the shadows in the background. It is instantly dramatic. It is instantly more iconographic to see yourself in black and white. I would submit to you that the stars that have lasted so long, an ingredient of their staying power to their dreamlike character by being photographed in black and white.
There's no doubt about that, and that's why so many people's favorite movies like Casablanca and The Third Man and Psycho and Raging Bull, which was voted as the best film of the 80s, have lasted because they were shot in black and white. They don't date like color does. And I think one of the messages we had on that show was black and white movies are not broken. They're not something that have to be fixed. They're not lacking something. The world is in color. So a color movie just gives you what you already have, but a black and white movie gives you another dimension of mystery and suggestiveness and shadows. That's why it's so good.
I asked Francois Truffaut once about this subject, and he said to me, bless him, I never wanted to shoot my films in color. When I write a script, I never write, he sits down on a red sofa next to a beige lamp. The only reason I have shot in color is because of the production money from French television, which insisted on color.
Okay, so that was a good show that we did, and another one I'm proud of is we were the first program in America to demonstrate on television why letterboxing is a good thing and why you shouldn't want panned and scanned movies that cut out 50% of the original image just in order to give you the illusion that your entire screen is filled with what's left of the picture. That was a good show. We're going to go ahead now and talk about some of the things we think are right and wrong with American movies, and I'm going to start with a movie that I think was the third best movie of last year, Pulp Fiction. It just edged out Forrest Gump, which was number 4. I'm sure some people would be happier if it had been the other way around. When Senator Dole attacked mindless violence, he certainly had me on his side with the first half of that equation when he talked about mindlessness, because the fact is, a lot of the movies that we see as professional movie critics, and we see almost everything, are mindless. They have no thought behind them at all. And the dialogue is totally action-driven. People say things in order to further the plot and bring about a predictable result. They very rarely say anything in the movies that is said simply to be interesting, simply because the mind can be pleased by the play of words and the selection of vocabulary. Very rarely in the movies does anybody talk with the interest, for example, that they have in a David Mamet play that you might see on the stage. But it seems to me that Quentin Tarantino, who wrote and directed Pulp Fiction, is an example of a new generation that is trying to fix that and change that. I think the good news for Tarantino was that 2 of the movies that Senator Dole singled out to attack were based on his screenplays. The bad news, of course, is those were the only 2 screenplays that Tarantino himself has denounced because he didn't like the way they turned out. In any event, let's start rolling now as I begin to talk from Pulp Fiction. This is one unbroken scene. These guys have arrived at a hotel. They're going to commit a violent entry into an apartment. And as they walk along, they talk. And the camera is really the third character here. It follows them. Travolta on the right, Samuel Jackson on the left. Let's listen to a little bit of their dialogue.
It's laying your hands in a familiar way on Marcellus' new wife. I mean, is it as bad as eating her pussy out? No. It was the same fucking ballpark.
Whoa, stop right there. Eating a bitch out and giving the bitch a foot massage ain't even the same.
American vernacular, some people would be offended by some of these words, but nobody here, I dare say, has not heard them before.
Difference from mine. But you know, touching his wife's feet and sticking your tongue in the hole against the hole is ain't the same fucking ballpark. It ain't
performing a foot massage on the wife of the gangster they work for, and whether or not that could get you into trouble.
Don't be telling me about
Now,
foot
the dramatic
massages. I'm
tension
the
in this
foot fucking
scene
master.
is
You
based
get
on the
out.
fact that
Shit,
as they
shit.
have
Got
this
my technique down and
conversation,
everything. I don't
they're
be taking
preparing to
it
go into an apartment where they expect, and we expect, that there will be gunplay. And so what Tarantino is doing is setting up tension between what they say and what they're about to do. Now, the camera has followed them into the lobby of the hotel, up the elevator, and now down this corridor. So the camera is another character here. The camera is us. We are walking down this corridor with them. And now a very interesting thing is going to happen.
Time you got?
7:22 in the a.m.
No, ain't quite time yet. Come on, let's hang back.
Okay, they pause in front of the door. Now they go on down the hallway. It's not time to go in yet. The camera doesn't follow them. The camera, which has followed them all the way from the taxi cab through the hotel lobby, up the elevator, and down the corridor, now turns and looks at them in long shot as they continue this conversation. What Travolta is demonstrating here is he's got us hooked. We're staying, we, being the camera, the point of view, are staying in front of the door where they're going to have to go in and risk their lives. We don't want this conversation to continue. There's a tension set up here by the fact that for the first time they have walked away from the camera and the camera hasn't followed them.
Fucking Marcellus knew it. And Antoine should have fucking known better. I mean, that's his fucking wife, man. These things have no sense of humor about this shit. You know what I'm saying?
It's an interesting point. Come on, let's get into character.
What's her name again?
Mia.
Mia.
Why are you so interested in Big Man's wife?
Well, he's going out of town in Florida, and he asked me if I'd take care of her while he's gone.
Take care of her?
No, man. Just take her out, you know. Show her a good time, make sure she don't get lonely.
You're gonna be taking Mia Wallace out on a date?
It is not a date. You know, it's like if you were going to take your buddy's wife to a movie or something. It's just good company, that's all.
Okay, and so now they're looking at the door, and now suddenly the entire tone of the movie is going to change when this door is open. There are some drug dealers inside. Yeah. And one of the interesting things about Pulp Fiction is that it probably has more dialogue in it than almost any other movie I saw last year. It's all dialogue. It's all colorful dialogue. It uses a lot of 4-letter words and 6-letter words and 12-letter words. And I was asked to apologize to the radio audience and to the C-SPAN audience for some of the dialogue in that clip of a movie that has grossed more than $110 million in the United States and has been seen by millions and millions of people, most of whom liked it. Because we have this kind of interesting double standard. You know, there are certain words that you use, but you wouldn't use them in front of your mother. And oddly enough, in many cases, as I found out when she got a little bit older, my mother knew those words too, but she just wouldn't use them in front of me. And it's kind of the same way with the media. There are words we all know, but we apologize for them if we use them within a certain context. Nobody would think to apologize for that language in the movie theater, because what it is, it's American vernacular, and Tarantino is able to listen to it very carefully and to run riffs on it in such a way that his characters become extremely colorful and interesting. And so that would be my first point about what's good with the movies right now, is that dialogue is getting to be more carefully written, more character-oriented, and more interesting, instead of simply being easily subtitled for the foreign release.
Let me ask you a tough question about that. Somebody who is offended by that may say, you know, Roger, you gave a beautiful description of the technical work there. You understand very well how the film worked, but you lost sight of the big picture. And the big picture is, this is a movie that, because it's shot up on a big screen and has charismatic guys like John Travolta, a heartthrob of America, Samuel L. Jackson, a very charismatic guy, using those language, that it is endorsing the use of that language, and young people who go to see it will use it. And second, that someone might say to you, and you know, what is this movie about? These are a bunch of thug killers. And so you're right technically, but you've been going to the movies too long, Ebert. You missed the big picture.
Well, how would I answer that? First of all, I know you own John Travolta's suit from Saturday Night Fever, but it's been a long time since he's been the heartthrob of America.
By the way, I'm trying to elevate.
I
You know what
understand
I'm doing.
yes.
This picture was also on my 10
I know,
best
you're
list.
trying to elevate
It was
the
actually
level of
number
dialogue,
2.
and I just dragged it right back down again.
There you go.
So I'll try to be at
Well, you're in
the
the right
same
town.
elevated level that you're at. Okay, good. Thank you very much for those questions. Well, I would say, first of all, it's important to see the whole film and to think about it. I showed it recently, a shot at a time, over a period of 10 hours using a stop-action Laserdisc at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And we looked at it very carefully. One of the things we discovered, which I think people pick up on when they see the film without bringing it up to a level of consciousness, is this is a very moral film that is really about redemption, and all of the major episodes in the film have the violent episode in the center, and at the end there is some kind of salvation or redemption for at least one of the characters. There is indeed, even in the case of the central character, Samuel Jackson, a decision to renounce violence, to quit his job with the mob, to put down his gun after he defuses a tricky situation, because he feels that God has intervened in his life and his life has been saved by a miracle. So that the movie is paradoxically much more optimistic and positive than the images of the movie. And then the other thing I would say about the language is they do talk this way. They do. Kids do talk this way. One of the greatest disappointments I had, and I understand that even the internet is involved in this discussion today, I finally got on the internet. And it seemed to me from what I'd heard that the internet was going to be millions of people all over the world engaged in this uplifting discourse. And as nearly as I could tell, in some of the youth groups that I went to, it basically consisted of hundreds and hundreds of undergraduates telling each other that they sucked. I think it's time now for us to recognize that certain words are just part of the ordinary daily speech of almost everyone. And that just is a fact of life. They've been diffused, they've been accepted. There are people under the age of 21 who don't even really know what we mean by four-letter words because they don't know that those words are in a different category. Now, it's bad manners, probably, but there you have it.
Well, I want to deal with the first part. The language, I think people can make individual choices. I think that's certainly the case. And I think it is this is a movie about people that talk that way. And my favorite story about bad language in the movies, two actually. One is a parent, sort of what Roger was saying. A parent wrote to me and says, you know, I don't mind bad language in the movies. It's just that if my child is sitting next to me. And I think that really is the dynamic, that sort of double standard. The second thing, it's the quality of the movie that dominates the language. The other amusing one was back in 1973 at a preview in Evanston, Illinois of The Last Detail. I'm sitting in front of an elderly couple, and the wife turns to the husband in front of me and says, darling, that's 23 F's words in the first 5 minutes. I always appreciated that she was counting. They stayed through the whole picture. Later I asked them, did you like the picture? They thought it was great. That's the way sailors talk. So again, it's the quality of the artistic treatment that I think dominates. I do personally hate, and feel personally assaulted when in a PG movie I see a gratuitous word used to elevate it out of G that comes in and blindsides me in the presence of my children. I personally, my opinion, feel that way. I empathize with people who feel that way. I want to re-emphasize with Pulp Fiction, which I placed even higher on my 10 best list than Roger, that the concluding scene of the picture has a marvelous sequence with Samuel L. Jackson where he serves as a peacemaker, holding a gun and trying to save the lives. The irony of that is spectacular. Holding a gun on people who are about to, if they're not careful, destroy themselves. And I think that's a very powerful, there is, in other words, a moral center in this picture. But if you don't stick around and watch the picture, you would be mightily offended by many of the visuals that you heard about. Okay.
You know, you said something that went by so fast, I just wanted to underline it. When you said that a movie that might be G-rated might throw in a four-letter word in order to elevate itself.
Not four-letter, but, you know, there are certain...
well, they're a four-letter, hell, damn.
Yeah.
Or even, yes.
Okay.
To get itself up to PG or even PG-13. It's kind of sad, but unless it's a Disney animated picture, G-rated movies don't do very well. One of the misstatements that Senator Dole made in his speech, and he was quoting Michael Medved, is this urban fact, urban legend type fact, which is absolutely untrue, which is that R-rated movies lose money and family movies make money. The fact is, unfortunately, just the contrary. And Variety did a very interesting analysis of Medved's figures showing that his book and his figures are completely erroneous. The fact is that action movies and violent movies do tend to make more money than family movies, with the exception of Disney animated classics. And in his speech, of course, listing the 5 family movies that did make a lot of money last year, he included True Lies as one of them. That's a movie in which the family scene, as I think we mentioned, involves a woman doing a striptease for a man she doesn't know is her husband, which he has set up in order to sadistically play a practical joke on her, which, as we all know, is just a wonderful family situation.
All right, I want to get to now my selection of what's right with American movies. And you know, there's an old joke about two kinds of people. There are, the joke goes, you know, there are two kinds of people, those who say there are two kinds of people and those who don't. At any rate, I'm going to attempt that by saying...
That's really a great joke. I'm gonna write that down and use it.
Honk, fellas, honk your horns again if you like that one. Quickly, I'm dying up here. The two kinds of movies that I see are films that are made from the heart and films that are made with an attention to the wallet. And I'm going to talk about one made from the heart. I'm going to recommend and show you a selection from, brief one, from Hoop Dreams, the great basketball documentary. 3 Chicago filmmakers followed 2 inner-city 8th graders for 5 years through their freshman year in college in their quest to become NBA superstars. Rather than show you a basketball scene from the movie, though, and particularly in Washington, why would you be interested in basketball? Thank you. I want to point out that here is the most powerful moment in the movie. It's a not basketball scene. We have seen plenty of crowd shots, applauding shots of the fans cheering these 2 young men on their journeys. We're now going to be taken to a graduation ceremony for one of their mothers graduating from nursing school. And we can debate how difficult it was to be a basketball player and how difficult it was to be a mother of a number of children in one of the projects in Chicago and graduate from nursing school, and focus on the payoff of the scene as you see the audience, and I'll tell the radio audience what happens after it's over.
I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free.
She's getting her diploma right now. She just raised her fist in celebration of getting her diploma, her nursing badge. And there it is, an empty auditorium. And my heart broke because I thought in that one beautiful shot, the filmmakers had captured a tremendous truth. It breaks now as I just see it. I hadn't seen it for a while. Movies made like that, movies that where you'll dedicate 5 years. What subject of people that you don't know and don't meet normally would you devote 5 years of your life to? 5 years of a young life. These are young filmmakers. It's the best. It's some of those, it's interesting, Roger, it's some of those very kids that might be summoned up in a distorted way by an attack on rap music, on some rap music. And I just want to say that the sustaining pleasure of our job is coming across films made from the heart like this. The enervating part of our job is coming across, well, we'll get to that in a second.
I agree with you about this film, Gene. It was #1 on both of our lists of the best films of the year, and indeed Premiere Magazine, in surveying 200 film critics in America, found that America's film critics in general thought that Hoop Dreams was the best film of the year. I hope that Senator Dole has seen that film. If he hasn't, I recommend it to him, because if there is a no-go area in our society, an area that is just simply kind of an empty space where we don't want to look and we don't want to know, it's the inner cities. It's the inner cities. Most white people don't realize that more young black men go to church every week than young white men. Most people don't realize that most people in the inner city are trying to hold their families together, are trying to get an education for their children, are trying to do the best they can. It's not all the images that are so easily summoned up by easy, glib attacks on rap artists. When you see Hoop Dreams, you spend 5 years in 2 families in the inner city of Chicago in a way that will totally alter your perception of what goes on in those areas of big cities. And you will see there, you will get a kind of an empathy that doesn't exist. It just seems to me that it's not a solution simply to deal in easy stereotyping, and that a movie like Hoop Dreams laboriously breaks down the stereotypes and replaces them with human faces.
Okay, now I'm going to pick something that's wrong with American movies. And I wrote what I'm about to read to you in November of last year when I gave a speech in Houston, and I didn't realize how relevant it would be today. I wrote, what's wrong with American movies? A lot of people might say they're too violent, but I think that the real problem is that American society as a whole is too violent. We're terribly frustrated by that. The solutions seem insurmountable, and so we try to do something even minor and lash out at the movies that most of us never see. Obviously, there can be good films with violence and bad films with violence. Artistic treatment is the issue. You heard that said less economically earlier today. For me, however, a bigger problem is that American movies are too often just marketing products. Films like The Beverly Hillbillies and The Flintstones. Somebody got the rights and drafted a story that critics have called, including this one, who I think got it from somebody else, a 4 glasses script, a script that can be summarized on 4 souvenir glasses at McDonald's. I got into the Flintstones for free and felt overcharged. But I did buy the glasses, and they were a good value. They actually held more water than the script. I want you now to look at the emptiness of the Flintstones. There were, I believe, 32 screenwriters. That is not an exaggeration. 32 screenwriters worked on this project. They needed a 33rd. The art direction is beguiling. It will get you there. The 30-second spots that we're pumping out, and that are currently pumping out for Casper, will get people there. The tie-ins with the restaurants will get people there. And the press, and boy, I want to hit the press one time myself. The press will report that Casper, that Beverly Hillbillies, that the Flintstones was #1 at the box office this week. It will be on every local newscast. It's cheap, it's quick, it's printed out, no thought. Run the scroll, send out the CG order, the supers. Every newspaper, including our greatest newspaper, publishes a box, big box with lots of white space in it, of the top box office gross, taking it down to 10. Why? Who cares unless you're a profit participant? Who isn't informed about the movies and doesn't know that the better films are likely to be on the bottom of the list? Don't you realize, the press, don't you realize how you are just being manipulated and being a marketing funnel for Hollywood? That you're reporting that, yes, that 30-second barrage of ads, that $20 million ad buy, that buy-in with Burger King, McDonald's, Hardee's, it worked. American kids went. Big surprise. I almost used some other language. Big surprise. And you report it, and then they can advertise it, the #1 film in America, or they can refine it and say the #1 comedy in America, the #1 thriller in America. And we'll print it big, and everybody makes money, and it's easy editing to throw that junk in. It's mindless thing. It isn't. There's never a sophisticated analysis of box office, except in Variety, where it should be. And it's terrible. If I could do one thing to affect the press, take the numbers out. Run them. If you have to run it in agate type. It is not really important, and all it does is tell you what ad campaigns have been successful. Big money gets people in the crowd. Do your analysis monthly, do it semi-annually. This week-to-week crap is really hurting and forcing people to feel that pictures that aren't on the list are damaged in some way. What do you mean they're damaged in some way? You think Hoop Dreams opened at #1? Ridiculous. It's a major, major mistake, and the press, and it doesn't mean to, it's being sloppy. It doesn't mean to, but it is causing movies, a form that we care deeply about, to turn into something like point spreads in Vegas. and I'll tell you where it affects the marketplace and affects Hollywood corporate arena. And that is that if you don't hit #1 in a week, you know you're going to be penalized in the executive suite. And so what happens, it's just like coaches. They just fired a Chicago White Sox coach after a few games of losing. Well, you don't hit a #1, you're going to get executives churning. And who makes the adventurous picture? Who takes the chance? It's the secure executive. In fact, Warner Brothers has made some of the best movies, daring movies in America, because their management has been in place so long. And that's what's needed. Those are the people who will take the risk.
There is another issue, of course, and that is that adults take longer to make up their mind to go to a movie than children do.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many adults I heard say, gee, I wish we'd gone to the Shawshank Redemption. Why isn't it still running? And I would say, well, it closed 2 months ago. How many years did you expect them to keep it in theaters until your plans got all synchronized? Because the fact is, kids are ready to go on Friday night to see a movie. But adults have to spend a little time, and by then, because the movie might open slow, might depend on word of mouth, what we're getting is a built-in marketing process that caters directly to the lowest common denominator.
Do we only have about 15 minutes
Let's
left.
drop the last 2 clips.
All right, so
I'll get to my next point,
remember,
and then we'll go to some questions.
I'm going to do the, for the radio audience, the bowling clip. You know, it's a bunch of bowling pins, and he knocks them down, John Goodman. That's the end of that.
Okay, so don't turn down the lights. We're not going to show it. Gene just described it to you. Isn't that right?
And then they go, all right, yeah.
Okay, now, and in the scene for
And
our
they're
radio
kind of
audience,
rocky, misformed bowling pins.
the next scene that I was going to show, and we're going to drop that too, radio audience, so you're not going to miss so much. Honk your horns, enjoy. It's from the Wild Bunch. And the reason I was going to show this scene leads to what I think is bad about American movies, and that is the rating system. I think the rating system stinks, and it needs to be reformed. What we have essentially is a situation in this country where there cannot be such a thing as an adults-only movie. When I was growing up, there were only 2 kinds of movies: movies for everybody and movies for adults only. And everybody knew what an adults-only movie was. But the rating system, when they came up with their original categories of G and PG and PG-13, which was added later, and then R, and then X, which later became NC-17, they made a crucial mistake. They didn't copyright the X, and they haven't copyrighted the NC-17. So that the problem is anyone can self-apply that rating to their movies, and before long, very quickly, what an X-rated movie meant was hardcore pornography. And the moment the X rating became associated with hardcore pornography, a couple of things happened. Newspapers, which are allegedly in favor of freedom of the press, nevertheless decided not to exercise it in this area. Many newspapers around the country will not accept advertisements for X-rated movies. Many radio and television stations, no X-rated ads. Many shopping malls and other places that are host to movie theaters, no, the lease says no movie theater in this mall can show an X-rated movie. Therefore, Hollywood gets the message, it's very clear, you can't make an X-rated mainstream movie. It totally belongs to the pornographers, who in the meantime moved out of theaters altogether. Pornography is an industry right now that exists entirely on video. So, as a result, all movies must have at least an R rating. They have to squeeze into the R. And there have been a couple of results of that. Number one, directors who might have a serious adult theme to explore, directors like Bernardo Bertolucci with The Last Tango in Paris, for example, find now, although they didn't in the 70s, but it's now become true, they can't deal with that subject because the studio won't let them make a movie that doesn't have at least an R rating. The other thing that has happened is the studios, with enormous pressure, have crammed as much sex and violence as they can get away with into the R-rated pictures, so that now what you have is a situation where the R rating is a lot rougher than it was really ever intended to be, because there's no place else for that material to go. In the meantime, you have the phenomenon of kids going into movies and tiptoeing across the aisle. You know, some Saturday afternoons at some multiplexes, the Disney picture will do 150% of capacity. There's 1.5 kids in every seat. Well, since none of the kids are standing in The Lion King, some of them must have tippy-toed across to that other family picture, True Lies, or some of the other pictures in the same multiplex. What I've called for, and Gene has also on our show over the years, is for an A rating that would be copyrighted by the MPAA and would be an adults-only rating that is not hardcore pornography. In other words, hey, this movie is not porno, but it's not for people under 17 because, of course, anyone can get into an R-rated movie if they have somebody to go in with them who looks as if they might be over 17. And we all know how well that's enforced. There ought to be an A rating. It would give directors more freedom to get into truly adult themes, including sex, which, after all, is an important part of human life, without having to deal with this skewed rating system. Now, I've debated this with Jack Valenti. Valenti says, but Roger, how can we draw the line between A and X? How do we know where sex ends and hardcore pornography begins? Well, I gave him a suggested guideline, which I can't repeat in front of this family audience, but which I think many of you can probably imagine for yourselves. And I also said that, like the Supreme Court, I think most people know hardcore pornography when they're looking at it. And after all, it's the job of the people on the rating board to make those decisions. That's what they're paid for, and that's what they should be doing. But the reason you will never see an A rating is because the MPAA and the people who pay Valenti's salaries have these terrible nightmares in which they have to turn somebody away from the turnstile. They don't want to refuse an admission to anyone. They want to sell that $7.50 ticket to anyone who comes to the theater. And so we have this perverted system in which all kinds of stuff is shoved down into a category that's open basically to everyone, and no other category exists.
We've got about 7 minutes left. Let's get to the questions, okay? And where are they?
We're going to be asked the questions.
No, apparently they're right here.
Right here.
Well, okay, I've got a whole bunch, excuse me, I'll step up. And I know you've dealt and tried to deal with the whole question of sex and violence, but a whole fistful still come up.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, come on, guys. Get
A fistful of questions. That could be a movie.
right. Get real. Never mind Senator Dole. Never mind President Clinton. Never mind politics. Is there more violence in the movies today than there used to be? B,
Yes.
is the problem that this increasing frequency of violence tends to desensitize children, in particular, to the evils of violence? And thirdly, how can you, in effect, defend that by talking about context and technique?
It's the same question I asked a moment
Cinema
ago.
verite. Forget the other guys. Give us your
I know
views
that's the heartfelt, serious question, and you phrased it very well. I tried to phrase it earlier. I think Roger spoke on it. I will tell you that we sit every week and try and deal with that very issue. And mindless violence is a phrase that is not alien to us. We use it quite often. Die Hard 3, right now. To me, he liked it. I didn't. Die Hard 3 was a bunch of explosions edited together to jolt the audience. It was just a shock show. I labeled it as such. I happen to like the first two. It's a complete shock show. Now, what will be the effect of it? That's where we get tricky. I'm telling you, the effect of seeing bad art is bad. It isn't good for you. I always feel that way. I always feel that way.
Well, that's true.
I'm not going to let people take that ground away from me. That's the difficulty, and I care about our reputations, so that if we knock the guys who are giving mindless remarks about the stuff, I don't want people to think that we're in favor of that. We've been doing it far earlier than he ever got into it.
Right. Okay. Yes, there's a lot of violence in movies. Is there more than there used to be? No, curiously enough. And that's where I disagree with Gene. Okay. There's less violence in the movies today than there was in the 70s. The 70s was the high point for movie violence. Most movie violence today tends to be more cartoony, exaggerated, and humorous than really violent in a way that will make you feel squeamish or disgusted. And movies like the Die Hard movies, maybe the one I liked is a shock show. Maybe the first two were just shock shows that Gene liked. I think that one of the reasons we go to the movies is to see stuff blow up real good and to see cars run around fast. That's fun. Pauline Kael wrote a book once called Kiss, Kiss, Bang, Bang. She said those 4 words, which she saw on an Italian movie poster, kind of summarized why most people go to the movies. And millions of people go to see these movies, and they enjoy them. There's more violence, however, than there ever was before on television. And it seems to me that it's not so much the content in itself, but the repetition of the content over and over that might really affect young children. I think it's kind of a shame that kids are parked in front of the TV for hours every day and for days every week, when in general they might see a Schwarzenegger movie or a Stallone movie once a year, and then generally when they're not that young. So television, I think, is a source of more problems than the movies. However, the theory, how can you talk about mise-en-scène or montage or things like this when these things are happening, is just a specious argument. If you want to talk about violence in our society, let's get serious for real, and let's talk about guns. Why is it that guns in the movies are bad, but they're okay in our streets? Can anybody explain that to me? I don't think so. You know, we shouldn't see people shooting each other with machine guns, but God forbid the average person with $100 shouldn't be able to buy one for his collection. You know, I would really like to meet one of these machine gun collectors in order to discuss his hobby with him.
I want to, just on the subject of violence, I want to read something that was said to me 23 years ago by Stanley Kubrick, one of our greatest, most brilliant filmmakers. I asked him about whether movie violence desensitizes viewers and triggers violent behavior in real life. These are not new issues that we're dealing with. He says, I don't think it does. I think that I love this sentence, I think that man's capacity for violence is an evolutionary hangover which no longer serves a useful purpose, but it's there all the same. In that sense, Kubrick does not separate us, does not point to a boogeyman, but talks about the things that link us together. We're on an evolutionary cycle here. And I think it's even, I think there's an even more important point. He says, it has been demonstrated that even after deep hypnosis in the post-hypnotic state, people will not do what is contrary to their nature, so that the idea that people can be corrupted by a film is, I think, completely wrong. And I think I would go even further. I would say, even hypothetically granting that it did, which I'm sure it does not, I should think that realistic violence is less likely to cause violence than the fun violence of James Bond or the Tom and Jerry cartoons in which the 8-inch lump on the head shrink and they're off to the next caper. That kind of violence, Kubrick said, if any, might cause emulation. It's like when young boys were fed nonsense about the glory of war. They might have gone off to war with expectations that didn't turn out to be true, whereas if they had been exposed to brutal, violent war films, they might have realized what was in store for them. Clearly, violent images on television helped shut down the Vietnam War. We would not shut down our exposure to violent, realistic images. That would be an error.
All right, let me shift to religion. Movie critic Michael Medved, in his book, observes that Hollywood tends to belittle religions and those who are true believers by showing comic book clergy and a variety of other unflattering images. Do you agree with that, and why is that so?
Yes, that's true. That's true, and it's about the only thing that Medved has said that I agree with. There aren't very many positive images of clergymen. Most of them are sex-mad people who are faking miracles in order to steal money from their congregations or their closet perverts. The only positive picture of a Catholic priest, portrayal of a Catholic priest, that I have seen in a movie in the last 15 years is in a British film called Raining Stones by Ken Loach. I can't think of another single Catholic priest in all of that time in any movie who has been depicted in a positive way. And as for anyone who is labeled with the term fundamentalist, forget about it. They're basically charlatans. It seems to me that movies are not interested in dealing with religion in a serious way, but unfortunately, when one comes along that does try to, it's immediately picketed by religious people.
I was waiting for that.
And I'm thinking of The Last Temptation of Christ, the Scorsese picture, the most serious, mature, thoughtful, thought-provoking movie on religion that I've seen in my lifetime. And the moment it comes out, everybody, all the church people go out and picket it. Why? Why? Because Jesus is shown being tempted by Mary Magdalene. Well, as a matter of fact, I read my Bible, and I know that he was. And furthermore, if Jesus was both God and man, he had to be tempted and temptable in order to resist temptation. You don't get any points for resisting something that you don't want to do in the first place.
Roger, what word is scrolled down here? What about
Last Temptation of Christ, written right there.
Major video chain not to stock it. The know-nothingism of that protest led to the major video chain not to stock Last Temptation of Christ.
And those people hadn't seen the movie either.
Of course they hadn't seen the movie.
No.
And yes, Hollywood does not deal very well and often with spirituality. That's true. But when it is done well by our greatest filmmaker, Martin Scorsese, it is stomped on by people that haven't even bothered to see it. It is probably as good a film about the duality of man and God as exists, and people weren't even allowed to take a look at it in the same mentality that's criticizing some movies today. It's very sad, and I'm glad that as we conclude exactly on our 1-hour presentation that we came to that point, because what we should do is send you to see good movies. We've tried to do that for 20 years.
So what movies should you go to see? I will give you 3 for your list: Hoop Dreams, Menace to Society, and Boys in the Hood. These are movies that will allow you to take the attacks on rap music and place them in a totally different context.
I would definitely agree with Hoop Dreams. Rent Last Temptation of Christ. I mean, if you can find it in a video store, I think that would be great. And if I had to pick the one film and the one image that lasts with me over the 20 years, I would say it's Taxi Driver, again by Martin Scorsese. Again, a film that would probably be censored today by the people that are criticizing violence in the movies. Rife with violent images, but about a character, Travis Bickle, who changed, and I realize I'm saying this in Washington, and the emphasis there, who changed characters like Travis Bickle, who would change our national agenda and change our self-image. There's no more important film, no more important subject matter than what leads to violence than that film, Taxi Driver. And again, it's the kind of picture that some people would have us not see or not have be made, and that's too bad.
Thank you very much for having us here. We enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Well, wait. Before we conclude, we have some gifts for you, and I have a final question.